Welcome back, everyone, to Ethics TV, and I am Jonathan, of course, and I'm joined by Michael Liebowitz, and I've been very, very, very eager to get this recording done for Ethics TV because I'm actually a fan of his show, and rather than me speak about it, you can read about everything in the description, but also I implore you, everyone who's watching and listening to this episode, you have to subscribe to The Rational Egoist, and it will be worth your while. The topics range from ethics to moral values to objectivism to self-help and the nonsense that is things like The Secret. It's all kinds of stuff, and it's worth the last 2 years of content is brilliant, but especially I'd say the last 5 or 6 months is just hit after hit after hit. So Michael, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I always start these shows with the same question, and then we'll go from there. We're going to let you direct us down the rabbit hole. What is keeping you busy right now? What's the most exciting thing that you're doing, and what's keeping you engaged with life?
Oh, wow. Well, in addition to doing the Rational Egoist, and the Rational Egoist is a show about ideas, essentially. I address ideas from criminal justice policy, economics, philosophy. I do debates on the show, and it's all about, I'm an objectivist, the philosophy of Ayn Rand. But I don't like to just go out all the time and talk Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand. I like to discuss topics about psychology, for instance, and demonstrate how objectivism is applicable, but do so kind of in an indirect way where I'm just having conversations. I'm not badgering the guests with objectivism. I just want people to see the implications that are there. And it's not that I never do shows on objectivism. I do, but I just don't want to be doing that every day. Also, over the last 2 months, I've been doing the Capitalist Corner on YouTube every day from 12 to 1 Eastern time with Mark Pellegrino, who not only is a good friend of mine, but he's also an actor. He was Lucifer in Supernatural. He was in the Big Lebowski. So that's been great, too. It's just surreal for me that I'm making the connections with the people that I've made connections with. And I'm vice chair of the American Capitalist Party, which was started by Mark Pellegrino. So I'm involved in promoting that. So those are my three main things, are doing the Rational Egoist, the Capitalist Corner, and promoting the American Capitalist Party. My goal, in addition to becoming filthy rich myself, which is my goal, but also to change minds, to bring people over to an individualist ethic of rational egoism, to promote free market capitalism, and to just help people grow.
Amazing. So, and what would you say, just briefly, for people who are fresh to objectivism, and to be honest, the quote, or rather the usage of the term rational egoist, can you summarize in 30 seconds what those pieces mean and why they're named in such a way, so that people, for instance, who haven't read anything from Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead, or haven't even heard of Ayn Rand or anything like that, just give us a 30-second overview so that people can know.
Okay. In essence, rational egoism is the philosophy that each person should act in his or her own best interest, but it's rational interest, right? It's not, I'm going to stomp all over people to get what I want in the moment, because ultimately that's counterproductive. That's self-defeating. I mean, you know, as a former criminal myself and knowing thousands of criminals, that's the criminal mindset, and it doesn't work. What does work is applying reason to our daily lives and acting in the way that fulfills us as rational beings. So the primary values in rational egoism from the objectivist point of view are reason, purpose, and self-esteem. Those are the things that we ought to be cultivating within ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that was I'm glad that you mentioned these things, because to introduce people who watch or listen to this to the point, there seems to be there's quite a lot of supporters for objectivism. There's some well-known supporters of it, ranging from Brad Pitt to even Angelina Jolie, but other people who have been quite Oliver Stone, for instance, who've spoken about this. But there are some critics of it too, and from my observation, the criticisms are seem to be somewhat taking the word selfish and using it as a hammer to bash individualist thinking with. And I'm not certain whether that's because we have, as a culture or society, interpreted selfishness as a derogatory term of taking from other people or being too self-centered. Is that, would you say that that's where the criticism seems to land, is this taxonomical attack, using selfishness as a bad thing?
Actually, no. That does happen, but normally the attacks take one of two approaches. They either criticize Ayn Rand in her personal life, which to me is entirely irrelevant. I don't care what she did in her personal life. You know, I don't care if Einstein was a psychopath. If relativity is true, it's true, right? It doesn't matter what he did. And if Ayn Rand was a hypocrite, not that she was, but if she was, it's irrelevant. Or they completely miss the mark on what they're criticizing. They build up straw men and attack them. I had a debate maybe a year ago with Andrew Wilson. Not really a debate. I thought it was going to be a debate. He chose to make it a pissing contest. But in his opening, where he described Atlas Shrugged, he got everything wrong. And that's not anything new. I mean, that's what you'll see with people doing it. Now, when it comes to the word selfish, yes. And I don't use the term selfish, and a lot of objectivists disagree with me. I just think it creates confusion. And then instead of arguing about the substance, we end up arguing about whether the word is applicable. And I really don't need to use that word. Rational self-interest for me cuts it. I want to explain that your life is your own. It doesn't belong to anybody else. You don't come into this world with debts to other people. You're only, and I don't even want to say it's not a duty, your only obligation, and that's if you want to live on this planet, is to yourself. Now, you can accumulate obligations as you go. You know, you have friends, you may have children, a spouse, but that doesn't alter your fundamental relation to reality, where you are the primary beneficiary of your actions. And the degree to which you have these obligations to other people is when it's in your interest to do so. Now, people have seems a difficult time understanding that. Like, my girlfriend's well-being is in my interest, right? I benefit from her happiness, and I'm hoping she benefits from mine. So my self-interest expands as I grow, as I, bring in more values and more people. What's in my interest grows from, I'm not just a baby who's seeking to get food, clothing, and shelter provided for me.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of the misinterpretation side. What I've also noticed is that it is almost it makes the point of the misinterpretation in how people are misinterpreting the fact that, my take on objectivism, one part of it is the importance of rational thought and critical thinking, and your reality, this particular dimension of reality, being constructed from your rationality, i.e. your reasoning of things. And the criticism of objectivism is, funnily enough, a lack of reasoning, a lack of critical thinking. And it's almost as if there is almost a trend sociologically that we would like something to be more simple and more straightforward, that we can just class as this is what I believe in, and that's that. And I feel that that almost means that objectivism is outside the grasp of low frequency thinkers to some extent. And I don't mean that in a hierarchical way. It just, there's a certain type of people that would criticize something like objectivism, and those type of people who criticize it are the same as people would look at you and say, well, you used to be a drug addict criminal, therefore there's nothing that you can add to society, which is as equally as stupid, I think.
Yeah. So you've been reading the comment sections.
Yes, I have.
I do get that frequently, because I did spend 25 years in prison. But like I tell people, okay, so 25 years ago, I was a scumbag. Now it's 28 years ago. I was a brute. But where are we now? What are you now? And you said low frequency thinkers, but it's low frequency by choice, right? We're not talking about people that are innately irrational. We're talking about people who are refusing to engage, refusing to think. And when it comes to ethics, I find sometimes there's no easy answer to an ethical problem. Ayn Rand herself said it's pretty simple to grasp abstract principles, but applying them to the concrete realities of life can be very difficult. And people want, if you go to the 10 Commandments, okay, I have a list of commands. It tells me what to do. I just follow that. I don't have to think any further. But life doesn't really confront us in that way, right? Like, you shouldn't bear false witness. There's the example that it always comes up. Well, if you shouldn't lie, what if the Nazis at your door and the Jews are in your basement? Do you just say, oh, yes, I have them, because you don't want to lie? That's complex. But to explain why it's okay to lie in that situation requires a lot of thought. It requires a deep understanding of ethics, why honesty isn't some duty commanded to us, but it's something to be employed in our own interest as our fundamental relationship to reality. In that context changes when we're being threatened, right? Because now it's reversed. It's the difference, for instance, between aggression and self-defense. To just say, well, violence is wrong. Well, what if someone's trying to kill me? Well, now the context changes. But in my experience, there are just a lot of people who don't want to engage the processes of thought that takes. It's much easier to just say, well, it's a categorical imperative, as in the case of Immanuel Kant, or God said, or Jesus commanded. That's just a far easier approach to take, even though it doesn't match the reality that we live in.
Yeah, I think there is a saying that God is the name of the blanket that is put over mystery to give its shape, and there is a short circuiting that often people do in terms of explaining things to a common denominator that makes life a lot easier. One of the most recent episode of yours, I think his name was Kyle, yesterday I think it went online, and one of the comments, there's only two commentators actually to that video. One of them is me and one of them is this other guy, and this other guy says, yeah, no, I see a kind of red flags that this dude's speaking about. He's talking about frequency and vibration and flow, and I prefer kind of newer Western thinking. And I counter commented and said, well, I don't know. I mean, well, the good thing is we don't always need to agree. Whatever resonates is good for you and me. But it's indicative that if it requires the consideration and thought and research to structure a system of understanding, and that's not easy. You and I have read a boatload of books to get our shape of things, and other people would prefer not to. But now this isn't hierarchical in terms of education standard. I mean, I think from reading into your background and listening to your stuff over the last 2 years, I think my upbringing and your upbringing weren't a million miles apart, actually. And unlike the really cool English dude who went to a grammar school, Wallace Worth, the guy with a hyphenated name with his self-help, the Objectivism.
Oh, Thomas Walker Worth, yeah,
right.
Yeah, so great. I liked him a lot.
Yeah, I liked him a lot as well. And so his upbringing is different than mine and yours. But the reason why I wanted to look deeper into philosophical structures was to make sense of what the hell was going on. So I kind of stumbled into Objectivism because I wanted to understand. I think I got to Objectivism through Locke, actually. I think I arrived in Locke, and then someone pointed out that there was the book. I actually started with Atlas Shrugged first, 1952, I think it came out. I arrived at the book in 1985, probably, and that was, for me, I immediately got the metaphor. I got the point of the railway and the industrial movement and the steel and actually I never thought, there you go. Absolutely. And I didn't find it confusing that John Galt was this in part a symbol and part a person, but even as a person is a symbol. It made so much sense to me. It made a shit ton of more sense than some books that were theoretically the really important books of our time. When you arrived at these structures, did you intuitively feel resonance off the bat, or did it take you time to structure what these, I mean, in Atlas Shrugged, it's one enormous metaphor for how society, I believe, how society can be controlled against its will in a collectivism movement of dominion. Did this click immediately to you, or did it take some time to adjust?
Let me back up just a little to your commentary on Kyle Brown, right? Because I had him on the other day. Now, I have a policy. I do a lot of debating, but if I'm going to debate, I tell the person up front, I want you to come on the show to debate. If I don't do that, then I don't interrupt to tell people all my disagreements, because they haven't prepared for a confrontational interview. And so I'm not going to do that. So nobody should ever perceive the fact that I don't interrupt and I don't disagree as if I'm agreeing. In the case of Kyle Brown, 90% of what he offered I thought was fantastic. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to focus on the little bit of stuff that I disagreed with him on. It just doesn't make sense to me. I could have turned a 40-minute or whatever it was, hour interview into 40 minutes of arguing about stuff that is not of the utmost importance. Or I could focus on his primary thesis, which is that people do not stand still. You're either growing or going backward. And he gives good advice on what to do to grow in terms of goal setting, focusing, that sort of thing. So Atlas Shrugged, when I first read Atlas Shrugged, I think I was 25. The way that I came across it was I had read a book called The Triumph of Liberty by Jim Powell, and it was 64 mini biographies of people that advanced liberty. And one of them was a person named Ayn Rand. And right off the bat, the story, and it was the politics initially that drew me to the book. When I read it, yes, it resonated solidly. It didn't take hold, as I don't think any philosophy can, in terms of consistency right away, because at the time I was trying to convert to Judaism. You know, I had gone through studying Buddhism and Christianity, and I thought I kind of settled on Judaism. And, you know, it's very difficult to just drop something like that just because something challenges it. So I was trying to incorporate the parts of Atlas and the message in, you know, incorporate it in with what I was already thinking. Then slowly I dropped the Judaism and I believed in sort of a deistic God. But eventually, through a lot of studying, thinking, challenging myself, challenging the works of Ayn Rand, it came to resonate more and more. So in short, it resonated right away, but it didn't take full hold maybe for 5 years.
Yeah, I have a sketchy, for several reasons, in the 80s. I don't have a great deal of memories that are very clear, but I'm pretty sure that one of the things that I arrived at during that period of time was self-sovereignty and our ownership of self, which of course is something that there's this kind of interesting ancestry of Ayn Rand onto Leonard Peikoff in terms of the challenging view of whether or not it is even possible to own oneself. I mean, I actually am the founder of a company called Self that is building decentralized self-sovereign technologies, and you wouldn't find a greater advocate than me in terms of the I think a fundamental human right of self-ownership. So I would debate anyone on any stage with no warning on this particular point. And so I found that one of the things that I resonated with you about Strongest Earliest was that you and I think, feel that there is an almost unarguable truth to the concept of owning oneself. I can't steelman the counter argument to that? Have you managed to steelman the counter to that in a way that's adequate, that you would be able to theoretically debate against yourself with?
I think, and my hubris may show, I think if somebody were to tell me that self-ownership is an axiom, that it's almost irrefutable, I think I would wreck them in a debate.
Right. That's right.
I think I would utterly destroy them, because when you dig into it, ownership ultimately, unless you're talking about government legislated ownership, where they say this is what ownership means. If you're talking about ownership in a natural right sense, it's an ethical concept, right? The very concept of rights is an ethical concept. And what you're getting at here is the fundamental, or one of the fundamental differences between objectivism and libertarianism, where libertarianism kind of starts with self-ownership, with the right to yourself, or the right to act. There's various libertarians, they take it in a different direction, but a right is a moral claim to something. If you don't have an antecedent moral theory to derive your rights from, then your rights are just floating in air. So you will see objectivists that disagree vehemently, and this is actually the root of some of the early arguments I had online, was about the concept of self-ownership. I don't employ it. I don't think it's harmful, if it's understood that it's derivative, that it's not the primary. If all one means by self-ownership is the right of use and disposal of one's own body, of one's own life, then I think it's fine. If one treats self-ownership, as in the case of Murray Rothbard, as your body's your property and all rights stem from that, and therefore all rights are property rights, I think that is very, very flawed and open to a lot of angles of attack, as I've shown in my debates with, for instance, libertarian giants like Stephan Kinsella and Walter Block.
Yeah, absolutely, you have indeed. Yeah, I feel equally robust in the argumentation structure on that. I mean, I run Ethics TV and own a firm called Self. So yeah, I could not agree more on that point. I think one of the things that I find interesting about today's modern world of technology is I am of the mindset that there is an immoral, collectivist, almost nihilistic methodology of big tech that has been left unchecked, apart from maybe by the Monopolies and Mergers Commission occasionally, and a couple of slapped wrists in Texas for, oh, oops, we forgot to turn off people's cameras when they shut their computer off. I think that there are significant issues with the technology industry that have been abusing human rights for decades, and is an internally structured, rigged game where no one is going, in a similar way to pharmaceutical companies who pay for the regulators who are regulating the pharmaceutical firms. It's like this game is like, it's completely and utterly rigged, which is why I don't bet on horse racing, for instance. When you know the way it works, or I don't go into casinos. It's like when you know the structure, it's like, no, I don't opt in. Do you look around the current world and think that you can spot some inherent issues, structural issues, of which us as humans are basically being deprioritized against our human rights? Do you feel that?
Well, first off, I'm woefully ignorant of the tech sector, so let me state that off the bat. But you mentioned the pharmaceutical company, so I'll analogize to that. So the problem starts with the clamor to have the government oversee the pharmaceutical industry. You put regulators in place. The regulators then, interact with the pharmaceutical company. The pharmaceutical company develops a lobby, and then they go toward their regulators, and you end up with what's called regulatory capture, where the people that are supposed to be regulating are now helping to subvert the very regulations they put in place. Now, the answer to that, to me, seems obvious. It's not more regulation, because then you increase regulatory capture. It's get rid of the regulation, allow for free competition, allow for the pharmaceutical companies to compete with each other, to put products out, and allow people to choose from those products and assume the risks of those products. In that sense, you'd be protecting the rights not only of the pharmaceutical companies and really the people working in them, to be free from government force, but also the right of consumers to buy products that they want to buy from willing sellers. So if you then apply that to tech, there's a clamor, like big tech needs to be regulated, AI needs to be regulated, but there's no reason for me to think that the same principle won't apply. That once the government gets in there, the very astute people, like the people, for instance, in Atlas Shrugged, the Warren Boyles of the world, they get their man in Washington and they set it up to rig it. So the answer would be deregulate, don't send in more government to sort of rig the system, because that's what's going to happen. And it's the same principle. You end up initiating force both against tech entrepreneurs to prevent them from producing content, but also against us from being able to purchase content. Now, there are things inherently risky. Like I have my iPhone. I know my iPhone has a camera on it. I know that Siri can listen to me if I, talk to her. I know that my data is mined when I use things like Google, but I choose to do it. So like to say that Google is violating my right to privacy, or when I use TikTok, the Chinese are spying on me, I'm assuming that risk because it's worth it to me.
Yes, that's
it's
right.
worth it because of all the benefits I get. So I think there's almost, in some of the criticisms of tech, there's almost an infantilization of people. Like, you're not smart enough to assume the risks in your life, and therefore we're going to have the government swoop in and protect you. And that is definitely not what we want.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a case study where anything like that has ever resulted in betterment for society.
No.
But I think it's interesting. In May the 22nd this year, the House of Representatives passed a budget, bipartisan, believe it or not. Both sides of the aisle agreed. It's now gone to the Senate to stop regulation for artificial intelligence for the next 10 years at state level. Now, one of the ways that could mean is that it should only be federal, not state. It shouldn't be state at all, but it should be up the top. Another reason could be because actually this is the only way of enabling free market. There's different interpretations of that. What I would like to see in general is people having an option and being able to choose between a service that they decide on or not, rather than being forced choice. And I think that's because my ultimate view is of human freedoms, and therefore anything that diminishes or reduces human freedoms can't be good. But I can see the reason why removing human freedoms has a giant shareholder benefit. Just that's not the way that I see it from a humanitarian perspective, right? And how flag wavy are you on the human freedoms part? And does that ever get into a stage of almost kind of ideology? And do you ever get criticisms of your libertarian view?
Of course, I get criticism, but my default position, right? Because I don't know everything. And I have no problem in an interview, in a debate, or anywhere else. If someone asks me a question and I don't know, I don't know. Even if it's, well, how does your ethics apply? And I say, well, I haven't thought of how it applies to this. Mm-hmm. But my default position is such that if I don't know, it's always to go on the side of freedom. So I understand there's risks with AI. Unless it can be demonstrated to me that the risk is so big that AI is basically going to mount a war against humans and take over, if that can be shown that that is a legitimate risk, I would say, okay, then maybe it needs to be regulated. But absent that, my default is allow it. Allow people to be free. I think that paradigm works well to side with human freedom. I mean, why do we want to have the government using force against people? And is the argument, well, AI is, could take jobs, therefore we're going to use force against people to prevent them from developing AI. Well, to me, having the government initiate force against people is worse than having people have to acclimate and learn new skills. Because they're still free. But if the government's using force, then people aren't free. They aren't free to develop their intellectual and moral faculties. They aren't free to grow, to act in their own interests, as we talked about earlier. So I'm not saying there's no case in which I'd ever agree to any laws pertaining to AI, but my default is allow it to go. Now, like I said, I'm not anywhere near an expert on the subject. I've tried to get guests on my show to talk about AI. They generally don't get back to me for whatever reason. Those people don't.
I would love to be on your show and speak about this.
Oh, well, okay. Well, let's do it.
Perfect. Anytime. And we'll do it at a sensible hour of the day for both of us, because I'm aware that this is very late for you. You show your phone to the camera, and so everyone who's very carefully eagle eye would see exactly what the time is with you. And so I think one of the ways about bettering hate speech is to create better speech. One of the ways of fixing AI risk is to create better tools with artificial intelligence that aren't an existential risk, which is what I'm doing itself. But one of the things in closing I wanted to ask you was a kind of a personal question in terms of how, I personally have, from knowing your story, I think that what you've done in your life will be in time seen as a hope for people, seen as a bastion of hope for people who may have lost their way or are losing their way and feel as if they can't come back from that, and they persist inside the hell that they found themselves in or built for themselves. Do you look back at your life do you use that as a fueling mechanism for what you're doing now? Or is it something which was a past chapter and you're now running on a more mature syntax? What I'm asking essentially is how much of the current and the future is based on the absolute abject terror of your past, or is it something that you feel is something like a trampoline or a springboard or a past chapter of a book that you're no longer really even concerned with?
This is a very difficult question, and I'll explain why. It's from a variety of perspectives. I'm woefully aware of how people interpret me based on the fact of the crimes I've committed, the fact that I spent so much time in prison. So if somebody asks me, for instance, well, how did you end up in crime? I can't answer that question without delving into my past, without delving into my upbringing. At the same time, I never want to come off as if I'm blaming my upbringing, right? Because a reason is not an excuse. So it's a challenge. So if someone asks me a question, I have to answer it or tell them I'm just not going to answer. And if I'm going to be honest, I can't avoid the fact that my father taught me at a young age to be violent, that my mother did too, that my parents were drug addicts. I can't just, eliminate that because it's factual. Also now, like I come on a show like yours and you ask me questions. If I don't say that I spent 25 years in prison, then people are going to say, oh, he's hiding the fact that he spent 25 years in prison. When I do talk about it, people tell me, oh, you're using the fact that you spent 25 years in prison to promote yourself. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. But at the same time, first of all, I know that it's a hook for people. Why wouldn't I use the fact that I spent 25 years in prison to promote myself and to promote the things that I'm interested in, especially when it's such an integral part of my story and who I am? I mean, to avoid it and ignore it would be dishonest. So as an example of so that's the sort of the public view of how I manage the subject in public. But there's also the internal and how I used my past to grow. And I always, since I engulfed on the self-improvement thing, why do I do this? How can I fix it? So roughly 2006 or 2007, I realized that one of my biggest issues was my fear of abandonment. And I realized how that drove so much of my behavior, my jealousy, my possessiveness, my control. And it mostly stemmed from my fear that my mother would die. My mother OD'd a few times when I was young, and there's a lot of reasons that I feared abandonment. That was sort of, it was a part of me. So I started working on it. While I'm working on it, and while I'm coming to grips with all the things that I'm, my cowardice, my approach to life that was fearful, in 2008, my mother commits suicide. And so this was my worst fear come to life. And it wasn't just a death where she died, of cancer. My mother deliberately took her life. It was like a deliberate act of abandonment, knowing what it would do to me. And I was reflecting on it, and I realized, okay, I'm still standing. And if I could stand through what I thought would be the worst thing that ever happened to me, then I could stand through a hell of a lot. And so I used the experience, as I use all my experiences, to grow, to use it to step forward into the world with less fear, with more confidence, and understanding that bad things happen in life. And really, to be honest, and excuse my French, but life doesn't give a fuck, right? It doesn't matter that I was working on myself and my abandonment issues. The world didn't stop and say, okay, let's protect this guy so that he can continue to grow. No, the world came in and hit me with the hardest blow I'd ever been hit with. And now it was up to me to see what I could do. So I understand that that's what life is. It's a lot of challenges, a lot of barriers, a lot of things happen that we don't like. A lot of people have faced a lot worse than what I've faced and overcome it. So I do that. I try to, with all my experiences, with all my failings. How can I grow? How can I move forward? How can I do better next time? And I think that's all that can be asked. And so that's how I approach it. That's what I do.
Well, I think that's a great way of ending the conversation. And I think more credit to you for that. It's a complex question and it's a complex answer. And you're right. The hook, the first time I ever heard about you was because of the prison story. It was, it was like, wow, here's this guy who's talking about, but then the fact that you were talking about philosophy was like, hold on a minute. So that's cool for me. My abandonment issues and being given up at birth, growing up in, with foster homes and stuff. I resonated with I can resonate quite strongly with the backstory that involves being left. But I think that, as I said right at the start of this, if anyone's watching or listening, go to the Rational Egoist YouTube channel, basically potluck, pick an episode. They're all great. And I think, to be honest with you, for those who really enjoyed this conversation, I would recommend you start at the first episode of Rational Egoist, because it's great, man. You got to, because it's like, you're not happy with it, but I think it's balls out. This is what it is. And I think it's actually, there's a purity to it that is kind of charming. It's kind of like, it shows parts of your personality that people who do what me and you do in these kind of contexts sometimes try and balance, or not hide, but we as Freud would say, that we're all violent thugs on the inside. It's just this kind of this lens. But I like the first episode because you were just straight out. Yeah, you were a bit pissed off. The guy on Facebook's being an asshole. Your dislike of Leonard Peikoff was or rather,
I love Leonard Peikoff. That's the thing. I love Leonard Peikoff.
Right, and also, but you're struggling. It was like you're kind of like, but why? I like, these are the things that I like, and we agree on this. But then there's this thing about the fact that we haven't got our ownership of ourselves, and it's like, why would you say this? And why would you try and build on top of something that's a closed system? And it just doesn't make any sense. I think that's cool.
It's so funny because I am firmly in the camp, and was then, that objectivism is a closed system. I was new to social media, and I felt like I was just being attacked. And so I felt I had to defend myself. And the fact is, I don't. Like it's easy to fall into that when people criticize us, that I have to respond, but I don't, and I still get that feeling. But you don't have to. It's just,
yeah. Well, there's one guy. There's a troll. There's a troll. There's a troll with a Latin. Nothing comes from nothing in Latin. One of your trolls who has commented 3 times negatively, just crap comments, like just it adds no value to anyone or anything. And I've got my Sunday Times best-selling book. I've got like loads and loads and loads and loads of 5-star reviews, and then there's one 1-star review, and the 1-star review is didn't get much from it. And it's like, what the why?
That's so fucking lazy. It is. Tell me why.
Right.
Make an argument.
Give me something to work with here. John, I didn't like the fact in chapter 5 you use the same case study as chapter 2. Give me something. And
Right.
And it's just laziness. And to go back to our full circle of our conversation, it's the low frequency by choice. It's like, I refuse to operate on I refuse to think critically or rationally about this. My reality is in a very, very small box, and that's that. And don't you dare tell me anything different. It's just like, please don't come anywhere near me. It's insane. Anyway, thank you for joining. Your bio is beneath this content, so anyone can read all about you, and I'll put all your links in there too. And email me when you want me on your show, because we can do this in reverse anytime. I'd love to be on.
When I wake up and I have my senses about me, I will do so.
Thank you, my friend. I will be there with bells on. I really appreciate it. Cheers, dude.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. See you later.